There was a moment, quiet, ordinary, almost forgettable, when Linda believed she was doing the right thing. Not a risky decision, not a reckless choice, but something responsible, something generous, something a mother is supposed to do. And at the time, it didn't feel like a sacrifice. It felt like love. 10 years later, that same decision would cost her everything she had planned for retirement. Not partially, not temporarily, but in a way she could never fully recover from. Linda was 62 years old, and for most of her life, she had been careful, very careful, with money, with decisions, with responsibilities. She worked as an administrative assistant, nearly 3 decades in the same company, reliable, organized, consistent, the kind of person people trust. Her life wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. And stability, after years of hard work, can feel like success. She raised 2 children, managed a household, handled bills, planned everything, every expense, every payment, every step, and slowly, over time, she built something important: security. By her early 60s, Linda had a plan, a modest retirement, nothing extravagant, but enough. Her house was almost paid off. Her savings weren't large, but they were steady, predictable, safe. For the first time in years, she could see the finish line. The call came on a Sunday evening. Her daughter, Melissa. Linda knew immediately. Something was wrong. There's a tone, a pause, a hesitation that parents recognize instantly. "Mom, I need help." That sentence changes everything. Melissa was 38, smart, independent, but life had become complicated. A divorce, legal expenses, credit cards, unexpected bills. Nothing unusual, nothing permanent. But together, they had created pressure. And now, that pressure had become urgent. "I'm behind on payments." Linda stayed quiet, listening. They're threatening legal action. Those words carry weight, immediate weight, because suddenly, this is no longer a problem. It's a crisis. Melissa explained everything, step by step, carefully, almost apologetically. Debt had grown faster than expected. Interest had increased. Payments had fallen behind. And now, there was a deadline. She needed money. A lot of money. $4,000 to $5,000. Linda felt her chest tighten. That number was not just money. It was time. Years of saving. Years of discipline. Years of sacrifice. And giving it away would change everything. Melissa spoke softly. "I'll pay you back." I just need time. This will fix everything." And those words felt sincere, because they came from someone Linda loved, someone she trusted, someone she had spent her entire life protecting. And in that moment, Linda didn't see risk. She saw her daughter, struggling, asking for help. That night, Linda sat alone in her kitchen, the same place where she had paid bills for years, planned budgets, made careful decisions. And now, she faced one of the biggest decisions of her life. Her savings account represented decades of work, but her daughter represented something else: love, responsibility, family. And slowly, a thought formed in her mind. I didn't save this money just for myself. That sentence felt right, comforting, justified. And once that belief settles in, the decision becomes easier. The next morning, Linda picked up the phone. "I'll help you." The process was simple. Too simple. A visit to the bank, a few documents, a confirmation. $4,000 to $5,000. Gone. In minutes. Melissa sounded relieved, grateful, emotional. "You saved me, Mom." And in that moment, Linda felt something powerful. Pride. Because helping your child, especially when they need you most, feels like the right decision. For a while, everything seemed fine. The calls stopped. The pressure disappeared. Melissa's situation stabilized, and Linda returned to her routine. Work, home, quiet evenings. But something had changed. Not dramatically, not immediately, but quietly. Her savings were no longer the same. Loss doesn't always feel like loss at first. There's no shock, no sudden collapse, just a quiet awareness. Linda adjusted. She told herself it was temporary. Melissa would repay her. Things would return to normal. But time has a way of revealing the truth. 6 months later, the phone rang again. Same name, same voice, different tone. More fragile, more uncertain. "Mom, something else happened." And just like that, the story began again. The second call felt different. Not because of what Melissa said, but because of how she said it. There was hesitation, a pause between sentences, a tone that sounded smaller. "Mom, I didn't want to tell you this." That sentence alone already prepares the ground. It creates sympathy. It lowers resistance. It makes the listener lean forward. Instead of pulling back, Melissa explained slowly, carefully, almost like she had rehearsed it. The first money had helped. It had stopped the immediate pressure. But it hadn't solved everything. There was still debts, still interest, still payments. And now, something unexpected had happened. A legal fee, A penalty. An additional cost she hadn't planned for. The amount this time was smaller. $8,000. And that's important, because smaller requests feel easier, less dangerous, more reasonable. But Melissa didn't just explain numbers. She explained feelings. I thought I could fix it. I didn't want to worry you again. I feel terrible asking this. And those words changed the situation completely. Because now, this isn't just about money. It's about guilt. About responsibility. About a daughter who feels ashamed. And a mother who wants to remove that feeling. That night, Linda didn't decide immediately. She sat in silence, thinking, because something inside her had changed. The first time, the decision felt clear. This time, it felt heavier. Not wrong, but not as easy. Her savings were already smaller. Her margin for error had narrowed. And for the first time, a quiet thought appeared. What if this doesn't stop? That question mattered more than anything else, because it pointed to something deeper, a pattern. But Linda didn't explore it, because exploring it would lead somewhere uncomfortable. So instead, she focused on something else. Her daughter, her situation, her need. And slowly, the same belief returned. She just needs a little more help. The next day, Linda called back. I'll help you again. The relief in Melissa's voice was immediate, noticeable. Thank you, Mom. I promise this is the last time. That sentence is one of the most repeated in financial mistakes. Not because people intend to lie, but because they believe it in the moment. The transfer was made. Quickly, quietly. $8,000. Linda didn't celebrate this time. There was no pride, no sense of victory, just relief. Relief that the problem was handled. Again. After that, something subtle changed in their relationship. Money became part of it. Not openly, not constantly, but quietly. In the background, a possibility, a safety net. And when money enters a relationship like that, boundaries begin to blur. 3 months passed, long enough for things to feel stable again, long enough for Linda to relax, long enough to believe it was over. Then the message came. Not a call this time, a text. Mom, can we talk? Short messages often carry more weight than long explanations, because they leave space for imagination, for concern, for anticipation. This time, the situation was different, more complicated, more serious. Melissa explained that she had tried to consolidate her debts, to fix everything properly, but something went wrong. A lender backed out. A payment was missed. Penalties increased. And now, the situation was worse than before. The amount was larger again. $20,000. Linda didn't respond right away. She couldn't. Because now, this wasn't just help. This was becoming a pattern. A cycle. And for the first time, that realization became clear. Melissa sensed the hesitation. So she changed her approach. I don't know what else to do. I feel like I'm drowning. I don't have anyone else. And that last sentence landed heavily, because it places responsibility in one place, on Linda. Not intentionally, not manipulatively, but effectively. Linda sat in silence after that call, because being the only option changes the decision. It removes alternatives. It removes distance. It turns help into obligation. At night, Linda asked herself something difficult. If I say no, what happens to her? And that question is what keeps people trapped in cycles like this, because the answer feels unacceptable. So instead of protecting themselves, they protect the other person. Again. The next morning, Linda went back to the bank. This time, it felt different. Slows, heavier. $20,000. Her savings dropped again. And now, the impact was visible, not just in numbers, but in reality. After that transfer, something important disappeared. The line between helping and sacrificing. Because now, Linda wasn't just supporting her daughter, she was funding the situation. And the most dangerous part, it still felt justified. Linda told herself something important. This is temporary. She just needs time. This will stabilize things. And those thoughts create an illusion. Control. Because believing there is an end makes continuing feel safe, even when it isn't. Months passed again. No new requests. No new emergencies. But something else happened. Linda stopped checking her retirement account. Not consciously, but gradually. Because the numbers no longer felt comfortable. And avoidance is often a sign that something deeper is wrong. 1 year later, everything changed again. But this time, it wouldn't be a request. It would be a reality. One that Linda could no longer fix with another transfer. For a while, there were no more calls, no urgent messages, no new problems, and that silence felt like progress. Linda allowed herself to believe something. Maybe it's finally over. Because after everything she had done, after every transfer, after every sacrifice, she needed to believe that. Months passed. Melissa sounded better, stronger, more in control. She talked about rebuilding, about budgeting, about fixing things properly this time. And Linda listened. carefully, hopeful, because hope is what makes difficult decisions feel worthwhile. Then one afternoon, something small happened. Linda received a letter, not from her daughter, from a bank. At first, it didn't seem important. Just another envelope, another document. But when she opened it, her stomach tightened. It was a notification. Her credit line had been reduced significantly. Linda didn't understand. She had always paid everything on time, always been careful, always been responsible. So why now? She called the bank, sat through the menu, waited, and finally, a representative answered. The voice on the phone was calm, professional, routine. Ma'am, based on recent activity, your financial profile has changed. Linda frowned. What do you mean? There was a pause. Then the explanation came. Her savings had dropped. Her available reserves were lower. Her risk level had increased. And because of that, the bank adjusted her credit. That was the moment Linda felt something shift. Not emotionally, practically. Because this wasn't about helping anymore. This was about consequences. Real ones. A few weeks later, something else happened. Her car needed repairs. Nothing major, but not small either. A few years earlier, this wouldn't have been a problem. She had savings, a cushion, a margin. But now, she hesitated because the margin was gone. Linda stood in her kitchen that night, looking at numbers, accounts, statements. And for the first time, she didn't just see what she had given. She saw what she had lost. Security, flexibility, options. Things that don't feel important until they disappear. She thought about calling Melissa, about asking for repayment, but something stopped her. Not fear. Not exactly. But something more complicated. She knew her daughter was still struggling, still rebuilding, still fragile, and asking for money back would change the dynamic. It would turn support into pressure. So she stayed quiet. Another year went by. Life continued. Worked. Bills. Routine. But something had changed permanently. Linda was no longer moving toward retirement. She was moving away from it. Then one day, at work, something happened. Her manager called her into the office, closed the door, sat down, and spoke carefully. Linda, we need to talk about staffing changes. Those words carry weight, immediate weight. The company was restructuring. Positions were being reduced. Roles were being changed. And Linda's position was affected. Not eliminated, but reduced. Fewer hours. Lower income. Linda listened quietly, nodded, asked a few questions, but inside, something tightened. Because this was the moment where everything connects. Her reduced savings, her weaker financial position, and now, less income. That night, Linda sat at her kitchen table again. Same place, different reality. And for the first time, she asked the question she had been avoiding. Can I still retire? She didn't need a calculator. She already knew. No, not the way she planned. Not in a few years. Not comfortably. That realization didn't arrive loudly. It didn't crash. It settled. Quietly. Heavily. Because this wasn't just a delay. It was a change in direction. A permanent one. Linda didn't feel angry. Not at first. She felt something else. Regret. Not about helping, but about how much she gave, and how little she protected herself. That night, one thought repeated in her mind. I thought I was solving the problem, but I was becoming part of it. And that realization changed everything. Things with Melissa were still good. They spoke. They saw each other. But something had changed. Unspoken. Because money leaves a trace, even when no one talks about it. Linda didn't collapse. She didn't give up. But she understood something clearly now. She would have to rebuild. Not from zero, but from a place she never expected to return to. At 6 to 4 years old, there is a moment in every long financial mistake when everything becomes clear. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but quietly. A realization that settles in and doesn't leave. For Linda, that moment came on an ordinary morning. She woke up early, same as always, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table. But something was different. Not the house, not the routine, her reality. Because now, her future looked different. Not imagined, not planned. Linda had always pictured retirement in a simple way. Less work, more time, a slow pace, nothing extravagant, just stability. But now, that version no longer existed. Retirement wasn't approaching. It was moving further away. She opened her accounts again. This time, she didn't avoid it. She looked at everything. Carefully. Completely. Savings. Reduced. Income. Level. Expenses. Still there. And for the first time, she calculated something honestly. How many more years do I need to work? The answer wasn't exact, but it was clear. At least 8 more years. Maybe 10. Years she hadn't planned. Years she hadn't prepared for. Years her body would feel. Because retirement isn't just financial. It's physical. Linda felt it now. The long days, the fatigue, the slower recovery. Things that didn't matter at 40 feel very different at 6 to 4. And the idea of continuing like that for nearly a decade more felt heavy. That's when the emotion finally arrived. Not explosive, not overwhelming, but steady. A quiet sadness, because she had done everything right for years, and still ended up here. That morning, she asked herself something simple. Would I do it again? And the answer was complicated, because helping her daughter felt right, still felt right. But the cost was something she hadn't fully understood. Sacrifice sounds noble. It sounds meaningful. But real sacrifice has consequences, long-term ones. And the problem isn't helping. The problem is helping without limits. Looking back, Linda could see it clearly. There was a line, a point where help became risk, a point where support became self-damage. But in real time, that line is invisible because it moves. Each time you cross it, it shifts further. A few weeks later, Linda did something she had avoided for a long time. She sat down with Melissa, not on the phone, not through messages, in person, and the conversation was different. Calm. Honest. Linda didn't accuse, didn't blame, but she said something important. I can't keep doing this. There was silence. Not tension, but understanding. Because deep down, Melissa knew. She had always known. I never wanted this to happen. That's what Melissa said. And it was true. Because most situations like this don't come from bad intentions. They come from desperation, from poor decisions, from trying to fix problems the wrong way. For the first time, they looked at the situation together, not as parent and child, but as two people affected by the same problem, and that changed everything. It didn't happen quickly. There was no sudden solution, no easy fix, just small steps. Melissa adjusted her finances, cut expenses, took more responsibility. Linda did the same, saved again, worked longer, adjusted expectations, and slowly, very slowly, things stabilized. But they didn't return to what they were before, because some decisions can't be undone. Today, Linda still works, not because she wants to, but because she has to. And every morning, she feels it, not just physically, but mentally, a quiet reminder of the decisions that led here. Stories like Linda's are everywhere, not dramatic, not said extreme, but common. Parents helping children, families supporting each other, money moving quietly between people who care. And most of the time, it feels right, because we assume something simple, that helping family is always the right decision. But the truth is more complicated. Helping is important, but so is protecting yourself. When you give money, especially large amounts, you are not just helping someone else. You are changing your own future. Sometimes slightly, sometimes permanently. Before making a decision like this, there are 3 questions worth asking. First, can I afford to lose this completely? Not temporarily, not eventually, completely, because that is always a possibility. Second, what happens to me if this situation repeats? Because one request rarely stays one request. And third, am I protecting my future as much as I'm protecting theirs? Because both matter, not just one. Linda didn't fail. She didn't make a reckless decision. She made a human one. A decision based on love, on responsibility, on connection. And those decisions are the hardest to question. Today, Linda's life is different. Not what she planned, but still moving forward. Still rebuilding. Still adapting. And sometimes she shares her story, not to regret it, but to give it meaning. Because the truth is, the most expensive financial decisions are rarely the ones that feel risky. They're the ones that feel right. The ones made for family. The ones made with good intentions. The ones we don't question until much later. And sometimes, helping someone else without limits, without boundaries, without a plan, can quietly, slowly, and permanently change the future you worked your entire life to build.